at Strategy Focused Group. We not only upskill, we inspire, enable, educate, discuss, innovate, motivate, challenge, let us help you elevate your team. Email us at info@strategyfocusedgroup.com.
Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. Mina Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it's a CEO series where we bring together the most amazing people, global leaders, entrepreneurs, innovators, and disruptors. Our guest today is Karen Hilton, founder and CEO of T.A.P Executive Coaching. She has held leadership roles in a range of industries, from technology, media, automotive, finance, and retail. Her last corporate stint was as a global vice president of HR for TRX, which is a leader in travel technology. She's a trauma and board certified executive coach, HR consultant, organizational strategist, keynote speaker, track record of successes. We're so happy to have you. Welcome, Karen. How are you? I'm a big fan, and I'm also a big fan.
Thank you. Hey, Ron. It's so good to see you. I guess I should say it's also really nice to meet you, because although we've known each other for a while, we've never met.
Exactly. And as I said, I was telling you earlier, for the people that know, anyone that's taken my HRBP session, she's the star kicking off the session, because she does an excellent approach to strategic human resources. So thank you for that. And I'm still using that video as my leading session. So thank you.
Your invoice is in the mail.
Okay, cool. Send it on over. I was in reading background and knowing you for over a period of time from afar. Mm-hmm. I read a quote, and it really resonated with me, because it says, "I spent a lifetime playing it safe, trying to fit in, neglecting gifts and talents, and doing life on someone else's terms." Yeah. That's a powerful quote. Walk us through that concept when you saw the light and said, "Let me switch this."
Yeah, that's such a big question. For me, so I went out into private practice in 2014 after a very difficult caregiving journey. My mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 7 years prior to that. And my mom was my best friend in the world for more than 30 years. So, we talked multiple times a day. We vacationed together. We did everything together. And so on one fateful day, I got a phone call. I was actually on my way. I was making my way to India to go see my team in India. And, so I was going through all of the travel requirements and that sort of thing. And leaving an event here in Atlanta, I got that call from my mom's caregiver and said, "Mom's not well, you need to get here." And So I did, 90 miles an hour, down 75, and arrived to find my mom in the middle of congestive heart failure. And it was one of the many kind of symptoms of her disease.
Yeah.
As she started to fail. It was at that point that I knew I had to make a decision. I had a dream job. I had a dream boss in David Cathcart, if he happens to be watching. He's the leader that everybody wants to work for.
Okay.
And so I had a tremendous amount of support, but at the end of the day, I had to make a decision. And so I did make that decision, and I resigned from my job, and I became my mother's full-time caregiver. And I'll be honest with you, Ron, nothing prepares you for being a caregiver, especially a full-time caregiver.
Yeah.
And although it wasn't overnight, it felt like it was overnight. I went from, working with amazing leaders and doing amazing work globally, to really just having to learn how to, give medicine and care for mom and do all of those things. So it was during that caregiving journey that I took a step back and really started to think about how I got to where I was. And although I was busier than I'd ever been taking care of my mom, I also had a different kind of time on my hands. And if you've ever had what I call a positive disruption, you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you mean.
Right. And so I just began thinking about what life felt like for me in that moment and what it was I wanted life to look like. And as I came to the end of that caregiving journey, by the time I'd come to the end of that caregiving journey, I'd had an opportunity to ask my mom all sorts of questions. I literally crawled into bed with her and asked her all of the things that I wanted to ask her. My mom was a very accomplished woman, but she would have admitted to you that she played it small. And so we had those kind of conversations when I would ask, well, Mom, why did you make this decision? Or why did you marry Dad and follow him all around the world and give up the things that were your superpowers? And so it got me to thinking a lot about, where have I played small? Right. And I began looking back at my life, but I also started looking at, and this is just the way my brain works, the lives and careers of people that I admired, and saw some commonalities where we did not step fully into our gifts and talents, or we prioritized other people, other organizations ahead of what was most important to us. And for me, I knew I had something, right? I knew I wanted to do more. But I wasn't quite sure how to get there.
Yeah.
At that particular point, I needed to shift out of kind of driven mode. I'm a very driven person, as I'm sure many of your community are. And that's good until it's not.
Yeah.
So I needed to do life differently. And what I really was thinking about is, my mom, my aunt, her sister, my grandmother, their mother, before me taught some lessons. And so I asked myself this question, what is it I need to learn, and what is it I can do differently? So that's really where I began thinking about this idea that I was playing small, not that I didn't have opportunities, because I had an amazing career. I really did. But I feel like it was very difficult for me to ask myself powerful questions at the time. This is long before I considered coaching.
Flashbacks,
right? And I wanted to be able to take bolder steps, and I wanted to define what that looked like.
Yeah. It's reflection.
Yeah.
Because lots of times we don't do that. I said, one of the gifts of COVID, it forced people to reflect.
Yeah.
You were locked down, and everything shifted from something in an uncomfortable zone for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I've always said this great resignation, it's just because people reflected and said, you know what, I don't want to put myself through this anymore.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool, specifically in tying into people who had a major impact in life. So I do one session that I do in leadership development. I ask people those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
Who has been impactful in your lives? And for the most part, it's never a manager. It's never some so-called leader. It's an uncle. It's a grandmother and all these kind of things, which gives you that grounding. So that grounding was enough for you to say, you know what, I'm going to rethink this and I'm going to move on. And this is where your company came about. Is that how that transitioned?
It is. It is. So T.A.P. So I have two businesses, T.A.P Executive Coaching and Rock Your Vision. T.A.P is an acronym for the Alice Project. My mother was Alice. I named my business she was still alive at the time. I named it in memory of her when she passed. It is now, I named it in honor of her when she was alive. It's now in memory of her.
I see.
But the idea was, my mother asked me when I told her what I was thinking about doing, she's like, why would you name your business after me? Like my life, like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And I think that is really where the fire in me came from when it comes to working with executive leaders and leaders in general. Because my mom, although she was incredibly competent and incredibly talented, she was a history maker in many ways. She didn't see herself in that light.
Yeah.
And when you don't know what you have, right?
Yeah.
You keep your candle under a bushel, right?
Yeah.
And so that's really where I got that fire from. But my mother was an incredible woman, and I'm forever grateful. If I could just be half the woman that she was in my lifetime, I will have done something.
Yeah, yeah. That's very, very powerful. Do you ever think if that would not have happened, would you have moved forward?
That's a great question. When I lost my mom, I was very angry. I was very hurt. Because in addition to the fact that she was an amazing human being and I loved her with my whole heart, I could not apply any experience, any, education, any network. Nothing could fix what was going on with my mom. I couldn't, it was something I couldn't control. Yeah. Right. So I was angry for a long time, coming out of that experience. And I often asked God, at least in my frame of reference, why couldn't it have been something else? Or, and that's the unanswerable question. What I know now, 9+ years into it, is when I go back and look at the leaders that I have had an opportunity to have influence in, or to have an impact in an organization. When someone comes up to me after a keynote that I do, or a workshop that I'm giving, and they have tears running down their face, or someone will send me an email or a letter that says, something that you said completely changed the trajectory of my career. I mean, even saying that, I get chills. Yeah. And so in another room in my house, I have a huge portrait of my mother. And I will often go in that room and just talk to Mom and say, Mom, I wish you knew just how much of an impact you've had in 9 years. I mean, I've spoken to, thousands upon thousands of people sharing her story. So, would it have been different? Maybe. I'm not sure. I want to know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you know what? You came away with that because in your first, based on the first question I asked you, you talked about the leader you work for, that everyone should work for a leader like that.
Yep.
So that was a positive. And then, and then when you take that, because you've kind of got an anchor, and then you go through what you've gone through, and that when you came out of that, you had the blueprint.
Yes.
Talk to us about that leader and how that leader impacted or set kind of a framework for leadership.
So his name was Dave Cathcart. He's an incredible human being, but he's also an exceptional leader. He has had a storied career. You can look him up on LinkedIn. He is a board member. He's a CFO. He's a CEO. He's a mentor. He's a coach. And yeah, he's an exceptional person. But Dave was kind of a leader's leader. And I feel really fortunate to have worked with him. I've learned a lot from him. I've argued with him. We've had that kind of relationship where you make history together and you go through all of the things. But I think the thing that I admired about Dave is that he could step out of the boardroom and have a conversation with an individual. And it was like you were the only person he was concerned about in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Dave also was very in touch with with this concept of what I call the whole leader, right? He knew that in order for his leaders to be their best, he also had to respect and honor the fact that there were other parts of who they were.
Yeah.
And in my case, I think Dave saw that. We had a tradition of going for barbecue about once every few months. And that was our thing. And it was just me and him.
Yeah.
And we would certainly talk about business, but we would also talk about life. And for me, although sometimes I disagreed with him vehemently, I would walk through walls for him. And if ever given the opportunity again to work with him, I would. Although I'm set. I'm doing what I'm called to be doing. But I would do anything for him because of the way he led. He challenged me. He told me when I was wrong. But he taught me. He would invest time in pulling me into the business, not just, relegating me to HR or whatever.
Process and all that stuff.
Yeah, he was a very collaborative leader. And I should say, Dave is one of many leaders. I wanted to be sure to say this in this environment. I think coming out of the pandemic, you talked about the great resignation or the great transition, whatever it is you want to call it. I think humanity is one big collection of inflection points. And while no one wanted the pandemic, and I have a deep reverence and respect for how much loss people experienced, I was not immune from that. The pandemic was just one inflection. We will experience others. And I only say that to say that I think that it's tempting to paint a broad brush. Coming out of the pandemic, there was this hyper focus on corporate organizations, right? Not for profit, for profit. And in many ways, I think corporations got vilified. But I really want to be careful and thoughtful about that, because the reality is that many of us have had life-changing opportunities through corporate structures, through our jobs and our careers. And I say that to say that Dave, while he was significant in my life, personally and professionally, there were other leaders throughout my career who were instrumental. Not all of them were amazing leaders. Some of them were very difficult leaders, right? But at least as I look back, I'm kind of that glass half full person. So I'm always looking for lessons and lessons that other leaders can teach me, whether they intend to or not. So I just think that perspective is really important when you look at who you're working for.
Yeah.
If they're not someone who knows how to mentor, or maybe they even shouldn't be mentoring or managing for that,
leaders for that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Take on that role of being a mentee. And in my world, the mentee mentor relationship, the mentee has the lion's share of the work.
And you're just kind of guiding them through that from the mentor perspective.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the whole leader, and you do you have your executive coaching practice, the whole leader, and I call it the 360 leader, which covers all of it.
Yeah.
So my euphemism for that is the 180 leader. The 180 leader is I'm only concerned with work.
Right.
I'm only concerned with the KPIs at the end of whatever period I need that. So talk about how you would coach a leader that had that 180 focus, and you wanted to build them into that whole leader, which is the 360. So you went for barbecue. It wasn't about business. It was just trying to get to know each other better. It could have been coffee. It could have been a whole host of things.
Yep. So my model is built around really 4 pillars in both of my practices. So vision, focus, purpose, and perspective. And of course, every leader, is different. My specialty is working with executive leaders, although I do work in other peer groups. I work a lot with CEOs and their leadership teams, and so you can imagine that there are big personalities,
Yes,
lots of experience, and that sort of thing. And so it's not uncommon that when I come into an executive coaching engagement, that leader has a lifetime of experience, habits, belief systems, and all of that. So it's really important for me when I begin an engagement to understand their perspective. So we do some pre-work around just getting to know the leader, right? What's important to them? What are their belief systems? What's worked for them? What's not worked for them? What have they heard before? What's been new to them? What are they struggling with? Where do they feel like they're successful? But then I also calibrate that. I've developed a tool as we begin to design goals around the coaching engagement. I've developed a tool, an online assessment to help calibrate those goals that leader is working on. And it does a lot of things, but I continue to be just kind of blown away by something so simple as goal setting as a framework, really understanding the leader, that whole leader, right?
Yeah.
And it's in that process that I then ask them, when you think about your vision as a leader, your vision for how you show up in your work, and your vision for your team or your business, if I'm working with a founder or whatever the case may be, you begin to unpack what they are looking forward to, what they are looking towards, and what they think they need to be looking towards. And it's in that we begin to understand kind of all of the whole brain model, that Herman developed years ago, all of the pieces and parts of that leader that are top of mind for them. When you calibrate what's important to them and what's important to the organization, or what's important to their team or their ministry or their community effort or whatever that is, you will begin to identify very quickly in a very simple model where there's calibration and alignment and where there's not.
Because when you mentioned the big personalities in the room, I was thinking about a potential client of mine, and the first time I met him, he just went on and on about how great the culture was, how great of a leader he is, and all the kind of things. But I noticed that the head of HR, the CHRO, was the 3 of us was in the room. She just kind of had her head down scribbling.
Yeah.
And I knew then it was something that wasn't cool. And we had the initial discussion. We were going to get back to each other. And I asked her, I said, can you walk me outside? And when we got in the elevator, I said, what was all that about? She said, he is totally clueless. He's here.
Yep.
And he thinks he's doing all the great things. But when you look inside, here's a person who comes in every morning, walks through a rows and rows and rows of cubicles of people, does not even say a simple good morning. Puts his jacket in his office, stays in there, bathroom breaks, meetings, and that's it. But meanwhile, he has this mindset that I'm here. And when you mentioned the big personality, this is what I thought about, because you got to puncture that balloon in some way to say, okay, let's bring it all down. And that assessment that you talked about is a cool way of doing that, because it causes you, again, to go back to what we talked about, was reflection.
Yes. So a couple things. One is, I'm really this is a huge passion area for me. I am not a fan of dumbing down the genius or the contribution or the style of the leader. There's some leaders that are introverts. There's some that are extroverts. There's some that are kind of, in your face, and there are others that are more reserved. I was working with the leader once, and he said to me, well, Karen, what you're telling me is I've got to be somebody else. And I said, no. I said, what I'm asking you to do is to be the best version of yourself. There's a difference. And I think when we go into a coaching engagement relationship, establishing that early is really, really important. It's one of the ways that I build trust. So for all my coaches out there, I just let you in on one of my secrets. That's a little bit of an art and a science, but I think encouraging a leader to be all of who they can be, but to be the best version of themselves is very important. The other thing that I think is really important, and I see this time and time again, oftentimes my clients will get frustrated with me because we spend a fair amount of time on the front end clarifying goals. And we do that calibration with the leader and with the stakeholder. One, because I always, at least in my engagements, I always want the company, the decision makers, to be engaged in the process. I know there are plenty of corporate coaching engagements where the company is just kind of on the side. I don't manage things that way because it is very important for there to be alignment, but there also needs to be buy-in, because when I leave, that leader then has to go back and work with those leaders, right? So it's a co-created engagement. But the big thing that I hear a lot is, well, let's just get, I hear what you're saying in terms of the goals, but I want to know how they're going to do it. Somebody said this to me recently, and I deeply respect that. But the reality is we see this happen a lot. There's actually some science around this, that if you do not clarify what the goals are, in other words, what's the purpose of the engagement? What are we actually working on? And you don't calibrate that, you can get halfway through an engagement and you've got a leader who's working on the wrong things, and they believe they're working on the right things.
Miscommunication.
Miscommunicated. That just ends up being a really expensive conversation.
When you started on this journey, you had this, reflection point during your mother's illness, and you decided to move to this new approach, in business. And there's always obstacles. I always tell people, I said, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be this. I want to be that. I said, it's a lot more than what you see. What you see is here. You don't know what goes on here.
That's right.
It's kind of the iceberg theory kind of approach.
Yeah.
Have you ever got to a certain point once you started out and, I call it looking in the rearview mirror and say, you know what, maybe not. How did you keep going? Because we always hit these blocks.
Yep. That's a great question. So I have had a couple of opportunities. So I think there are some milestones that are important to talk about. One is when I first got started, I'd had an incredible corporate career, but I'd never run or built a business. And so it's very, very common. Again, there's lots of research on this in entrepreneurship. When you start and you begin to question yourself, like, I don't know, maybe, and again, I had tons and tons of experience, but being an entrepreneur is a whole universe. We need to have a separate show about that. But that's a whole separate universe. And so I kind of had one toe here and one toe. Maybe I should go back. Maybe I shouldn't. And at least in my case, I was fortunate enough that my husband Steve was gainfully employed, so I could float in that tension. Right. But once I got some momentum, and I will say that at least in my case, once people found out I went out on my own, like I was slammed very, very quickly. So I've been kind of overwhelmed for 9 years, but that's cool. That's cool because you had that. And that was only because the brand of Karen was there that people felt comfortable in coming there. So all of the points leading up to that in your career enabled that new brand to take off. Yes. And I feel very fortunate because of that. I didn't do it on my own. I had an incredible kind of personal board of directors and champions and sponsors in my networks who supported that. So that speaks to the power of networking and net weaving, as some people call it, and nurturing your network throughout. But, so that was kind of early on. And then about midway, when people begin realizing that you have something to offer, a lot of times what you'll see is people are attracted to contribution, right? Genius or savvy is really sexy, if I can say so. But it doesn't, it's not, it may have been what got you there, but it won't keep you there.
Marshall Goldsmith.
Contribution is really the I think the thing that has sustained me, because not every engagement that I've done has been for a fee. I work very intentionally to contribute in environments that mean a lot to me, and where I feel like good work is happening. And I think that really gave me momentum. So
so you know what, a lot of the things you're saying is so when you see me smile, I said yep, me too. So I was thinking about, you said you contribute. I've always looked at life as that every day you make a deposit. You keep making these deposits, and when you need a withdrawal, it's always there.
So good.
So when you think of being in the entrepreneur and you're giving back, it's not always about a fee.
That's right.
It's about an impact, because there was a commercial on years ago that says, you tell someone, and this is what happens with the brand of why you were successful in doing that. Did that work for you, that concept?
Absolutely. And I think people know when you are contributing or serving with an agenda. And I come out of a family of servant leaders. I'm surrounded by servant leaders. In one of my other businesses, Rock Your Vision, our community pastor is Pastor Andy Smith of Influencers Atlanta, Influencers Kennesaw, and he is the epitome of servant leadership. And so I've always surrounded myself with people who are constantly giving, showing up, and doing it in the background, right? They're not looking for, a moniker or a shout out. They're just doing it because it's the right thing to do. I've
always admired celebrities that do things and you never hear about it. Versus the ones who do it and then they show them and all of the PR that goes behind that. Because I question that sometimes. What are you doing beyond that and trying to make that connection?
That's right.
Without always trying to be out in front.
That's right.
Cool.
Very powerful.
So let's take a break and then we'll come back, because when we come back, I wanted to delve a little deep into career advice for people that are struggling during COVID, from organizations as to how you are advising organizations to move forward with the concept you're talking about, people trying to find themselves. So let's take a quick break and we'll come right back.
Do you have an all-star HR team? You may feel your team is already performing at a high level, but let's take a closer look. Would your company's top leaders and employees agree that your HR team are operating at a high level? Are team members able to influence top executives on difficult topics? Are team members business and strategy focused on the challenges the organization is facing? Does the executive team trust your direct reports as advisors on human capital issues? If you can answer yes to these questions, you have built an outstanding team. If you feel there is room for improvement, Strategy Focused Group can create a custom development program to elevate the quality of your HR team. We use HCI certification programs as well as non-certified HRBP MBA masterclass to give your team a laser focus on the business and strategy. Please email us at info@strategyfocusedgroup.com.
Welcome back, everyone. In our first question, I talked about the phrase you use, spend a lifetime playing it safe, trying to fit in, neglecting gifts and talents. So I want to take that through the so-called post-COVID, if you want to call it, experience, because a lot of employees are struggling now, whether they're going to make a move, whether they're going to stay where they're staying. In other words, they're not happy What advice would you give people that are listening in that are kind of sitting on the fence as to what's next, and I'm afraid?
Oh, wow. Yeah, such a great question. So I do a ton of work around this right now.
Yeah.
And it's with leaders at every level. So I think the first thing I want to say is that for your listeners, if that is you, if that describes you, you're overwhelmed or you feel stuck or you feel uncertain or disengaged, you don't have any energy. Those are all indicators.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you to get support. That's the first thing I want to say. I think I'm amazed at the impact as a coach that I'm able to have with my leaders and being that support system for them. But not everybody, has the benefit of a coach.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's important to say, if you're experiencing that, get support. Reach out to your medical professional, licensed medical professional, or a licensed counselor or therapist, your pastor. They have community resources. Your departments of health have resources. Exhaust every option to get support. I think it's also really important to be honest with yourself about what you're experiencing. And what I have spent really the past 3 years helping leaders navigate as a trauma certified coach. Part of what I've helped them do is identify, at least on the surface, what they're experiencing. Now, let me say this. I am not a therapist, and I don't play one on TV.
Don't play one on TV, right?
Yeah, no, it's really important.
Yeah.
But I partner with other professionals to be able to make referrals.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had the training to be able to identify, when something is outside of the scope of coaching. Having said that, I think once you identify what the indicators are, part of what you have to do is identify what's next.
Yeah.
Right. And that takes a tremendous amount of courage sometimes, particularly for leaders who are gainfully employed. They have families to take care of, but they have all of these, things going on. It's what I call the wilderness experience. I actually built a course around this idea of how to master the wilderness experience. And mastering the wilderness experience is not about pretending like everything's okay.
Yeah.
It's not about, continuing the grind and just keep going and keep going and keep going. I'm going to try to convince my husband, if he's watching this, this is new. I'm going to try to convince him to develop a course with me around this, because I think one of the worst things that we can do is pretend like everything is okay.
Yeah.
So the very first step is acknowledging it.
Yeah.
And then identifying what are those indicators, what are those things that are happening to you, because that will also help you identify what to do now and what to do next. Right? Some people need the support of a coach. They just need somebody to help them kind of sort through and define what progress looks like.
Powerful word you used was pretend. A lot of people are in pretend mode.
Yep.
That's a comfort zone.
It is.
And they don't want to disrupt that, So I like yourself, I do a lot of pro bono work, but I want serious people.
Yeah.
And if you're not serious, I don't have the time for you, because I think lots of times, when we read about people like yourselves, entrepreneurs, and everybody wants to do these things, they don't realize the hard work that goes into that. So if you're struggling on that job and you want to open your own business, even a few questions into that, they don't have a clue as to what that's about, because they're trying to buy into an image.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things that, so when I first started my executive coaching practice, one of the things that was really important to me was giving back. So my business, Rock Your Vision, it is a for-profit, but was really designed to do that, to make coaching and coaching resources available and accessible for a broader cross section. Because there was a point in my life when I was told, yeah, you're not getting any coaching or development because you're not at that level. Right. And so, you know, the minute I could be in a position to fix that, I'm like, I got you.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I've built an amazing community, really helping leaders do that. And the way that we say is, yes, you can build a vision that you love. And we say, you know, there are 3 pillars on top of vision that help you do that. First, get focused. Get focused on the things that matter and sort through. And the way that I say it is, tell me what you want. Now tell me what you really want.
Yeah.
Right. And then the second
get off
thing,
the surface and just go deeper
that's
into
right.
exactly.
That's right. That's where we, you know, start in that goal planning session, right? What are we actually working on? And I'll be honest with you, Ron, I'm actually working on a draft blog article right now called The Case for Goal Setting for Executive Leaders.
Okay.
Because it's one of the things that, you know, you might be surprised to hear this, but many leaders actually don't know how to set personal development goals.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You know this, I'm preaching to the choir here. Right. So we do these big strategy sessions on the organizational level, but when it comes to really drilling it down and trying to make sure that we're working on the right things, that can be very difficult. So I developed a framework for that. And I am blown away by the feedback that I get from entrepreneurs, CEOs, you know, corporations, stay-at-home moms, you name it, developing a framework to help people really drill down. It's called the Imagine Matrix. Okay. And it's a whole course, but we work through that to be able to help them identify those things that they actually want to do. And in doing that, often what we sort out is not necessarily that, you know, someone wants to start their own business, but it may be that what they're looking for is more autonomy, or maybe what they're looking to do in a particular point in their career is to tap into the creative side or the more analytical side of their brain. So I think it's really powerful to be able to drill down to get focused.
Yeah, I was going to add to that or they don't want to be that next level.
That's right.
They may want to just pull back, concentrate, and become that subject matter expert, but a deeper wealth of knowledge.
Yes. Yes.
But in a lot of organizations, that may be prohibitive.
It may.
It may. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, I think part of the work that I do with my leaders is particularly leaders that feel dissatisfied, or maybe they're struggling with something, you know, they're thinking about leaving or whatever the case may be. You know, I walk them through a process to try to identify, you know, what's this really about, right? Yeah. Getting to that kind of base level issue. It's not always about, because we have incredible talent. We want to retain that talent. So I think giving leaders an opportunity to be thoughtful about what it is they really want to be doing is not, it's not the kiss of death. It's not a way of sending our employees away. It's actually a great retention strategy.
It is. It is. So as we close out, if you could go back to your first leadership role and coach yourself at that point, what insight would you tell your younger self at that first manager's level?
Don't be so stinking serious. Like, I actually got this feedback from a colleague. This was a lifetime ago, but I got invited. It wasn't an accident, but I really wasn't supposed to be there. And I have Dr. Kim Harris to thank. Ron, she's someone that you should know, Dr. Kim Harris. She invited me to a leadership training class. It was actually the first taste I got of coaching. And in that leadership class, we were supposed to put together a presentation and then present to our peers. And, you know, I was just excited to be there. I was drinking the Kool-Aid and I put my presentation together. I was all buttoned up and I'm like, oh, I nailed that. I nailed that.
Yeah, done that.
Yeah. And I sat there waiting for my feedback, like, thank you very much. And the feedback that I got was, Karen, you are so serious. Like, you are so afraid to fail. Yeah. And I was like, I beg your pardon? Like, I was horrified. Best feedback, one of the best pieces of feedback I've ever gotten. It was transformational for me. So if I could tell myself anything, it would be to be more curious, get comfortable with failing. Now, I don't mean make a career out of it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, get
It's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world, and take those experiences that you've had, and get curious about it. I do a lot of that work with leaders when I'm working with leaders that are struggling, is really shifting their perspective, right? Because most leaders, by the time they see me, I mean, literally, you can see them tense up, and it's like, you're good. We're gonna go on a journey together, but we're gonna do it from a place of curiosity, not from a place of fear.
Yeah. Cool. Karen, thank you so much for being a guest. This was a master class on coaching. It was really a master class on coaching, and I know you're busy, and I really appreciate you making the effort to be with us on this Friday morning, to share all of your knowledge and all the years, and as I'm a fanboy, so it was cool from my side too. So
Come on.
Yeah, cool. So thank you so much. We're gonna close that now, but I'll be right back.
Anytime.